Before we get started, if you enjoy these stories, then please like and subscribe as it will greatly support and help me push out more of these videos. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to know what you guys think, and I will be replying to each and every one of you. Thank you.
You know when you're scrolling late at night, half out of boredom, half out of curiosity, and you just swipe on someone without thinking too much about it? That's how this started. I wasn't even looking for something serious, just something to distract myself. But when we matched, it felt different right away. Their profile was polished, not overly so, but just enough to make it seem like they really put thought into it. They had this easy charm in their messages, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. I caught myself smiling at my phone like an idiot. It wasn't long before we were texting daily. At first, it was all lighthearted stuff: favorite shows, music, funny stories. They seemed to like all the same things I did. It was uncanny, but I chalked it up to one of those rare, perfect match situations. And they really got asterisk me, Like they'd somehow cracked open my brain and plucked out all the stuff I didn't even realize I wanted to talk about. After a couple of weeks, they suggested meeting up in person. Normally, I hesitate. Strangers from the internet and all that. But with them, it felt safe. We decided on a little cafe downtown, one of those trendy spots with mismatched furniture and overpriced coffee. I showed up a little early, half expecting an awkward introduction, but when they walked in, it was like they'd stepped straight out of their photos. Perfect smile, effortless confidence. They hugged me like we were already friends, and any nervousness I had melted away. The date was flawless. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. They knew obscure facts about my favorite bands, had read all the books I loved, and even ordered my go-to drink without asking. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what people talk about when they say they'd met the one. It felt almost too good to be true. Looking back, that should have been my first red flag. Too good to be true doesn't just happen. We started seeing each other regularly after that. They never seemed to have an off day, always attentive, always saying the right thing, always there when I needed them. It was flattering at first, being someone's absolute focus like that. They mirrored my energy so perfectly it felt like I'd known them forever. They'd pick up on little things I mentioned in passing, a favorite childhood snack, a random anecdote about my high school days, and surprised me with how much they remembered. It was sweet, but as time went on, it started to feel off. For one, they never talked much about themselves. Whenever I'd ask about their past, they'd deflect or turn the question back to me. At first, I thought they were just private, or maybe they'd had a rough life and didn't want to open up too soon. But it wasn't just their past. They didn't have much of a present, either. They never talked about friends, family, or work. Their schedules seemed suspiciously flexible, like they didn't really have any obligations outside of spending time with me. One night, I was over at their place, a sleek apartment that looked like it had been ripped straight out of a magazine. I was poking around their bookshelf when I noticed how carefully curated it was. All the same authors I loved, all the same genres. It was eerie. I thought about the books I'd gushed over during our first date and realized all of them were here, even the obscure ones. That's when this nagging feeling crept in, like maybe they were just too good at this. Too good at being everything I wanted. But I brushed it off. Maybe they were just really thoughtful. Maybe this was what being truly compatible looked like. I didn't want to ruin something amazing by overthinking it. Then came the night I found the file. We were hanging out at their place, and they'd stepped out to grab something from the corner store. I stayed behind, idly scrolling through my phone, when my battery died. I didn't think twice about borrowing their laptop to charge it and pass the time. But as I opened it up, there it was. This folder on their desktop labeled your profile at first. I thought it was something dumb, like a dating profile they'd forgotten to delete. But curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. I wish I hadn't. Inside was everything. Pages and pages of notes about me. Stuff I told them, sure, but also things I'd never shared. Deeply personal things, details about my childhood, fears I'd only ever kept to myself, random facts about my habits, my routines. There were screenshots of old social media posts I'd forgotten existed, photos of me taken from God knows where, even a list of my passwords and security questions. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just someone being attentive or thoughtful. This was obsession. They'd been collecting information about me like some kind of twisted hobby. And then there was the final file. It was a document titled Asterisk Next Steps Asterisk. I almost didn't open it, but by then, my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't stop myself. It was a detailed plan, like a roadmap of how to deepen our connection. It outlined things I hadn't even realized they'd been doing, mirroring my interests, subtly nudging me away from certain friends, making themselves indispensable. The last few lines were about moving in together, followed by vague references to long-term integration. I slammed the laptop shut and bolted. My mind was racing as I grabbed my stuff and left their apartment. By the time they got back, I was long gone. They tried to contact me after that, texts, calls, even showing up at places they knew I'd be. I blocked them on everything, but for weeks, I felt like I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of someone who looked like them out of the corner of my eye, or get this creeping feeling that I wasn't alone. I even moved to a new place, changed my routines, but it took months before I felt even remotely safe again. Sometimes I think about how easy it was for them to slip into my life, how seamless it all felt at the time. It makes me second-guess every interaction I have now, wondering if people are really who they seem. I used to think the scariest part of meeting someone new was the chance they'd break your heart. Turns out there are much worse things than heartbreak. We'd been together for a year when I first started noticing the disappearances. At first, it was little things, running out for groceries and taking way longer than seemed normal, or slipping out late at night with a vague, half-hearted excuse about needing air. I didn't think much of it. Everyone needs space sometimes, right? But then it became more frequent. They'd vanish for hours at a time, unreachable, and when they came back, they were different, restless, distracted. It was subtle, but I noticed. I asked once where they were going. Their answer was vague, something about work stuff they couldn't really explain, which didn't make much sense since their job wasn't exactly the cloak and dagger kind. But I let it go. You want to trust the person you're with, even when something in your gut tells you not to. It kept happening, though. Every few nights, they disappear without warning. No explanation, no heads up, just gone. I started paying closer attention after that. What time they left, what kind of mood they seemed to be in beforehand, whether they came back looking tired or agitated. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was going on, it wasn't good. Then came the night I decided to follow them. It wasn't planned. They'd been acting weird all day, fidgety and on edge, and when they got up after dinner and mumbled something about needing to take care of something, I made up my mind. I waited a few minutes after they left, then grabbed my keys and slipped out the door. I kept my headlights off and followed them from a distance, my heart pounding the whole time. I felt ridiculous, like some paranoid fool who'd watched one too many thrillers, but I couldn't stop. They didn't go where I expected. Not to a friend's house or a bar or anywhere else that might have made sense. Instead, they drove out to the edge of town, past the suburbs and into this rundown part of the city I'd only ever seen in passing. When they finally stopped, it was in front of an abandoned house. The place looked like it had been left to rot years ago, peeling paint, boarded-up windows, overgrown yard. It was the kind of place you'd cross the street to avoid if you saw it during the day. At night, it was worse. I parked a block away and watched as they got out of the car and disappeared inside. No hesitation, like they'd done it 100 times before. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do. My head was screaming at me to leave, to go home and pretend I'd never seen any of this, but curiosity won out. I had to know. The front door was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar. The air inside was damp and stale, thick with the smell of mildew. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I crept through the house, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Every shadow felt like it was moving, every sound made my heart jump. I kept telling myself this was a mistake, that I should turn around and leave before they caught me snooping, but I kept going. In the back of the house, I found a room that didn't fit with the rest. While the rest of the place was falling apart, this one had been cleaned up, swept floors, a folding table in the middle, a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. And on that table were photos, dozens of them. I walked closer, my pulse racing. The photos were of me. Some were recent, Ones I recognized from my social media, but others were older, much older. Pictures of me as a kid, as a teenager at events I didn't even remember attending. There were candid shots of me walking to class in college, sitting at a cafe, laughing with friends. Some of them had dates scribbled on the back. All of them were unsettlingly intimate, the kind of pictures someone takes when they're watching from a distance. There was no way they could have taken all of these. Some of the photos were from years before we even met. I felt sick. My stomach twisted into knots, and my hands were shaking as I flipped through the pile. I kept thinking, asterisk, this doesn't make sense. This can't be real, asterisk, but there it was, all laid out in front of me. Proof that they'd been watching me, tracking me, long before we'd ever started dating. And then I heard the floor creak behind me. I spun around, hard hammering, but the room was empty, or at least I thought it was. My brain was in overdrive, convinced I was about to see them standing there, watching me with that same strange intensity I'd never thought twice about before tonight. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the doorway, then grabbed my phone and took a few shaky pictures of the table. I didn't even stop to look for more. I just needed to get out. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see their car following me. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was trembling so badly I could barely unlock the door. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring at my phone, going over the photos I'd taken and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The next day, I confronted them. I don't know what I expected, a confession maybe, or some plausible explanation that would make all of this go away. Instead, they acted confused, like they had no idea what I was talking about. When I mentioned the house, their face went blank, like I'd caught them in a lie, but they couldn't figure out how to cover it up. They denied everything, of course, said I must have been mistaken, or that maybe someone else was messing with me. But the way they looked at me after that, cold, calculating, it was like I was seeing them for the first time. I ended it that day, blocked them on everything, and started looking over my shoulder wherever I went. I still don't know the full story, why they had those photos, how long they'd been following me, or what they were planning. Part of me doesn't want to know, but I can't stop thinking about that house, about all the years of my life laid out on that table like a twisted scrapbook. Sometimes, late at night, I'll get this feeling like I'm being watched. I'll check the windows, the locks, the shadows in the corners of my room, but I never find anything. Still, I can't shake the thought. They knew where I lived before. What's stopping them from finding me again? It started as one of those third-date conversations where you're still getting to know each other but feel comfortable enough to get a little weird. We'd gone out for drinks and ended up at their place, flipping through a streaming service, pretending we cared about picking a movie. Somehow we got on the topic of superstitions. They joked about how they always threw spilled salt over their shoulder or avoided stepping on cracks in the sidewalk. It was cute, endearing even. I teased them about it, but honestly, I found it kind of charming. Everyone's got their quirks, right? At the time, I didn't think much of it. As we spent more time together, though, I started noticing how deeply those quirks ran. They weren't just avoiding cracks. They refused to walk a certain route home because it felt wrong. They had little trinkets and charms in every corner of their apartment, each with its own story or purpose. This one keeps bad luck away, or that one's for protection. They'd sometimes mutter things under their breath when we were out, especially if we walked past cemeteries or churches. It wasn't like they were trying to hide it. It just seemed like part of who they were. I didn't care. Honestly, I thought it was harmless. We all have rituals, even if we don't call them that. I had my own neurotic habits too, double-checking the locks, setting 3 alarms every morning. No big deal. Then one night, they mentioned their exes. Not in a weird or bitter way, just casually as we were trading stories about past relationships. They seemed surprisingly neutral about their breakups. No big drama, no bad blood. But then they said something that stuck with me. It's strange, though. Every time I've ended something bad happens to them. They laughed like it was nothing and waved it off. I guess I'm bad luck. At the time, I just shrugged it off as a coincidence or a weird joke. People say stuff like that all the time. I'm cursed, or I have the worst luck. I didn't realize then how literal they were being. The first time I thought something was truly off was a few weeks later. We were scrolling through social media one evening, half watching TV, when they paused on a post. It was from one of their exes, someone I'd only heard about in passing. The post was somber, talking about a house fire that had destroyed almost everything they owned. My partner's reaction was strange, detached, almost resigned, like they'd been expecting it. "That's awful," they said, but their face didn't match their words. They almost looked guilty. After that, I started paying more attention. Little comments they'd make, the way they seemed to know when something bad was going to happen. It wasn't always their exes, but it was often enough to notice a pattern. They'd mention someone from their past in a fleeting, offhand way, and within days, I'd hear about a car accident or a sudden illness. I told myself it was just bad timing. There was no way they could actually have anything to do with it. But the more I tried to dismiss it, the more I noticed the strange things they did. The way they always had to light candles in a certain order, or how they'd suddenly go quiet and distant when we passed certain places. Once I caught them scribbling something in a notebook late at night. They snapped it shut as soon as I walked in, laughing it off as just a journal. I let it go, but the unease started creeping in. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt wrong. It all came to a head one evening when I was alone at their place. They'd run out to grab dinner, and I stayed behind, flipping through their bookshelves. They had a weird mix of stuff, self-help books, some classic literature, and a surprising number of old, dusty volumes that looked like they belonged in a museum. One of them caught my eye because the title was faded, almost unreadable. When I pulled it out, I realized it wasn't just old, it was ancient, the kind of book with crumbling pages and a smell like damp earth. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The text was dense, full of symbols and strange diagrams that made no sense to me. It looked like some kind of ritualistic guide, maybe Wiccan or occult. At first, I thought it was just another of their quirky interests. But then I saw the margins. Someone had written in them names, dates, little notes, scrawled in a messy hand. And there, halfway through the book, was my name. Not just once, either. My name appeared again and again, underlined, circled, written alongside phrases like protection necessary and binding complete. My stomach churned as I flipped through the pages, finding more and more notes that seemed to reference me. Things about my birthday, my habits, even fears I'd never mentioned to anyone. By the time I heard the front door open, I'd shoved the book back on the shelf and was pretending to scroll on my phone. My hands were shaking. They'd walked in, cheerful, and completely unaware of what I'd just seen. I sat there, barely able to look at them, trying to piece together what the hell was going on. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started looking for more clues, piecing together little things they'd said and done. The rituals, the strange reactions, the way they always seemed to know more than they should. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that maybe I was just reading too much into it. But deep down I knew. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't just superstition. It was deliberate. I ended things not long after that. I didn't give them a reason, just said I needed space and blocked them on everything. They didn't fight it. In fact, they almost seemed calm about it, like they knew this was coming. A week later, I was in a car accident. Nothing major, but enough to scare me. I couldn't stop thinking about what they'd said that night on our third date. How every relationship they ended seemed to leave a trail of tragedy behind it. I don't know if they caused it, or if it was just some cosmic coincidence, but I haven't felt safe since. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see them standing there with that calm, knowing smile. I keep wondering if I'll ever really be free of them, or if their name is written somewhere too, in the margins of a book I'll never find. I always thought it was odd how little they talked about their past. You know, most people will at least give you the highlights, a funny story about an ex, some self-deprecating tale of heartbreak. Not them. Anytime the topic of old relationships came up, they'd get quiet, change the subject, or say something vague like, "That's all behind me now." At first, I didn't push. Everyone's got baggage, and not everyone likes to unpack it right away. But as time went on, their silence started to feel less like privacy and more like avoidance. We'd been together for about 6 months when I stumbled across the box. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I'd been helping them clean out their closet because they'd been complaining about not having enough space for their winter clothes. They were in the kitchen, sorting through a pile of old jackets, while I tackled the closet. That's when I saw it, tucked in the back behind a stack of shoeboxes, a small wooden box, unassuming but locked with a sturdy brass clasp. It didn't match the rest of their stuff, which was all sleek and modern. This thing looked handmade, worn, like it had been around for decades. Curiosity got the better of me. I called out, jokingly asking if they were hiding treasure or old love letters, but they didn't respond. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I wonder if they knew exactly what I found. I brought the box out and asked them what it was. Their reaction was strange. They froze, like they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. Then they forced a laugh and said it was just old junk, and told me to leave it alone. Something about their tone made me uneasy. They'd never been snappy with me before, but this wasn't just snappy. It was defensive, almost panicked. I put the box back, but the image of it stuck in my head. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. Every time I brought it up, they brushed me off with the same vague explanation. Eventually, I decided I had to know what was inside. One evening, when they'd gone out for a work dinner, I went back to the closet. The box was still there, buried under a pile of scarves. The lock wasn't high-tech, just a little padlock you might find on a diary. I felt guilty as hell, but my hands were already moving, fumbling with a pair of bobby pins I'd grabbed from the bathroom. It took longer than I expected, but eventually the lock clicked open. What I found inside made my stomach drop. The first thing I noticed was the smell, faint but unmistakable, like old wood and something metallic, almost like blood. The box was filled with small objects, each carefully labeled. Necklaces, rings, bracelets, all tucked into little fabric pouches, with names written on slips of paper. Underneath the jewelry were photographs, torn in half, some burned around the edges. Each photo had a name written on the back, along with a date. Most of the dates seemed random, but a few had a second date written next to them, a death date. And then there were the hair clippings, small locks of hair tied with string, each in its own little baggie. Every single one was labeled, just like the rest. I sat there for a long time, staring at the contents of the box, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. It felt like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see, something private and dark and deeply wrong. My hands shook as I sifted through the items, reading the names and dates. Some of the names I recognized. They'd mentioned them in passing as old friends or co-workers. Others were unfamiliar, but it was the ones with the death dates that made my blood run cold. I remember one name specifically because I'd asked about them once. It had come up during a conversation about music, and they'd mentioned an old friend who used to be in a band. When I asked what happened to them, they'd shrugged and said, "They're not around anymore." I thought it was weirdly cryptic at the time, but I didn't press. Now, staring at their name and the date of their death, I felt sick. I put everything back exactly how I found it, locked the box, and shoved it back into the closet. I spent the rest of the night pretending everything was fine, even though my mind was racing. I couldn't look at them the same way after that. Every time they smiled at me, every time they touched me, I felt this creeping dread, like I was next on some invisible list. I tried to convince myself it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it was some kind of morbid keepsake box, a way of holding on to people they'd lost. But no matter how I spun it, I couldn't shake the feeling that those names, those objects, meant something darker. A few weeks later, I told them I needed space. I made up some excuse about work stress, but the truth was I couldn't be around them anymore. They seemed hurt but didn't argue, just nodded and said they understood. That should make me feel better, but it didn't. If anything, their calm acceptance made it worse, like they knew this was inevitable. I've moved twice since then, changed my number, deleted all my old social media accounts. I still think about that box, about the names and dates, about the pieces of jewelry and locks of hair. Sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I heard someone outside my door. I'll check the locks. The window's my phone. But no matter what I do, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I keep telling myself I'm just paranoid, but deep down, I know better. Some things, once you've seen them, they'll let you go. It started with the dreams. At least I thought they were dreams. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, disoriented, with the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. And then I'd see them, my partner, standing at the foot of the bed or by the door, watching me. They never said anything. They didn't move, just stood there, perfectly still, their face unreadable in the dim light. Each time, I'd blink and they'd be gone. Or maybe I'd drift back to sleep, convincing myself it had just been a trick of my groggy mind. The first time it happened, I wrote it off as a nightmare. The second time, it unsettled me, but I still managed to push it aside. By the third or fourth time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It felt too real, the way my skin prickled as though someone was in the room with me. The eerie calm on their face. It wasn't just a bad dream. It felt like something more. One morning over coffee, I finally brought it up. I tried to laugh it off, framing it as a funny anecdote. Hey, I keep dreaming that you're standing over me at night. Maybe my subconscious thinks you're some kind of creep. They didn't laugh. Instead, they looked uneasy. Then they said, almost too casually, "Oh, I sleepwalk sometimes. It's probably nothing." I wanted to believe that. Really, I did. Sleepwalking made sense, didn't it? People do weird things in their sleep. But something about their tone didn't sit right with me. It felt rehearsed, like they'd been waiting for me to ask. After that, I started watching them more closely at night. I'd lie awake, waiting to catch them in the act, but nothing happened for weeks. They slept like a rock, peaceful and unmoving, while I tossed and turned, haunted by the memory of those dreams. I started to feel like I was losing it, like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. And then one night, I woke up to find them standing there. This time, it wasn't a dream. I could feel the weight of their presence before I even opened my eyes. When I finally did, they were standing by the side of the bed, staring down at me. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, my voice shaking as I said their name. They didn't respond. Their eyes were open, unblinking, but there was something off about them. Too focused, too aware. This wasn't sleepwalking. I was frozen, unsure of what to do, when they finally spoke. Their voice was low, almost a whisper, and it sent a chill down my spine. "I was wondering when you'd notice," they said, their lips curling into a faint, unsettling smile. My throat went dry. Notice what? I managed to choke out. They tilted their head, studying me like I was a puzzle they were trying to solve. "How long I've been watching," they said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I don't remember much of what happened next. I think I stammered something about going back to sleep, my voice cracking as I tried to act like I wasn't terrified. They nodded, almost as if humoring me, and climbed back into bed. I stayed awake the rest of the night, my heart pounding, every nerve on edge. The next morning, they acted like nothing had happened. They were cheerful, affectionate, even more attentive than usual. It was almost enough to make me question whether I'd imagined the whole thing. But I couldn't shake the memory of their face, the way their eyes seemed to gleam in the darkness. That wasn't something I could have dreamed. I started looking for excuses to stay out late or sleep on the couch, blaming it on work stress or back pain. They didn't seem to mind, but every now and then, I'd catch them watching me out of the corner of my eye. During dinner, while we were watching TV, even when I was brushing my teeth. They'd look away as soon as I noticed, but it didn't feel casual. It felt intentional. One night, I decided to search their phone while they were in the shower. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. What I found didn't make sense at first. Folders of notes, photos, and videos. All of them were of me. Screenshots of my texts, candid photos from places I didn't even realize they'd been with me, recordings of conversations we'd had. There was even a file labeled Sleep, filled with videos of me in bed, taken from the corner of the room. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through them, each one time-stamped in the middle of the night. The last video stopped me cold. It was from the night before. In it, I was sleeping soundly, completely unaware as they stood over me watching. Then, slowly, they leaned down, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. They looked into the camera and whispered, "Soon." I slammed the phone shut and stuffed it back where I'd found it, my hands shaking. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. Confront them, leave, call the police. Every option felt dangerous, like I was playing a game where I didn't know the rules. That night, I packed a bag while they were asleep. I didn't tell them I was leaving. I didn't even leave a note. I just slipped out the door, heart pounding, and drove to a friend's house across town. I didn't answer their texts or calls the next day, and when they showed up at my work, I hid in the bathroom until they left. I've since moved to another city, changed my number, and cut off everyone who might lead them back to me. But I still wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, half convinced I'll see them standing there, watching me. Sometimes I think about their words, "I was wondering when you'd notice." The worst part? I can't help but wonder what they meant by soon.
If you enjoyed these stories, please share your thoughts in the comments below.